Good day, everyone, and welcome to the IMO Singapore Future of Shipping Conference. My name is Yvonne Chan, and I'll be your moderator for today. This event is jointly organized by the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore and the International Maritime Organization as part of Singapore Maritime Week 2021. Today, we will explore opportunities to build a greener, safer, and more efficient shipping industry. A lineup of speakers and panelists representing regions, governments, and industry will share their insights on how the global community can achieve the IMO's 2050 greenhouse gas reduction target and how digitalisation can shape the future of shipping. Over 1,700 participants have registered for this event, including key decision makers from various governments worldwide and representatives from across the different sectors in the maritime industry. So thank you for joining us for this conversation. To begin today's program, I would now like to invite the Minister of Transport for Singapore, Mr. Ong Ye Kung, to address us. Minister, please.
Secretary General of the IMO, Mr. Kee Tak Lin, Excellencies and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Since the age of the explorers, ships have enabled goods and people to flow around the world. So over the centuries, trade flows have grown and globalization quickened. With the advent of the steamship in the 19th century, we were no longer at the mercy of the winds. The invention of the humble container facilitated explosive growth in world trade. With trade comes greater business opportunities, creation of jobs, cooperation, interdependence between countries, which set the precondition for peace and stability. Developments in shipping had and will continue to have a real impact on the development of economies and uplifting of lives around the world. The shipping community, comprising ports, vessels, seafarers, shippers, is itself very interconnected. I'm happy that many distinguished partners who believe in finding solutions together are gathered at this conference. I'm especially grateful to the IMO, which is organizing this conference with us after the very successful Future of Shipping webinars held last year. Today, the maritime industry is charting some exciting new frontiers. And let me share with you two areas: decarbonisation and digitalisation, where we can work together to realize a better future of shipping. Climate change is a global emergency. Its impact gradual but serious, and the impetus to address it is urgent. In Singapore, we launched the Singapore Green Plan 2030. With that, sustainable development and decarbonisation is now our national imperative. The maritime industry needs to play its part in this plan. International shipping accounts for about 2 to 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. The IMO has adopted targets for international shipping to reduce carbon intensity by at least 40% by 2030 and to at least half total greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, both in comparison to 2008 levels. Using transshipment container hub ports like Singapore is already the most economically and environmentally efficient way to move international cargo. Why? Because cargo can be consolidated on larger ships, direct port-to-port sailings can be reduced, and vessel idle times also reduced through efficient port operations. Together, we can make further steps to make the shipping of tomorrow greener, and Singapore will do our part. The Singapore Maritime Foundation, with the support of MPA, we convened an IAP, the International Advisory Panel on Maritime Decarbonisation last year. The IAP has brought together leaders from industry, academia, government to propose pathways to decarbonize the industry. The IAP has released its recommendations earlier this week, and co-chair Mr. Andreas Omenbao will be speaking more about them later at this conference. One critical area to work on is the maritime fuel of the future. Zero carbon fuels like ammonia and hydrogen, they are possible, but these ideal solutions are quite a distance away from being viable. In the interim, LNG is recognized as a practical and transitional fuel to reduce carbon and sulfur emissions as compared to conventional maritime fuels. Last month, the first ship-to-container LNG bunkering operations was completed in Singapore waters. We are also supporting the industry to research, test, and adopt green fuels and technologies through the enhanced Maritime Green Future Fund and the new Maritime Decarbonisation Centre. To spur this whole process on, we need the right price signals. Hence, a very meaningful action plan is to introduce an international, non-discriminatory levy on maritime fuel consumption, and then channel the proceeds into research and development of cleaner maritime fuels. To support these longer-term developments, the MPA, the Singapore Shipping Association, and the Global Compact Network Singapore will sign an MOU to train the industry in carbon accounting, support companies in managing and lowering emissions, and recognize and proliferate best practices. Some of our IAP's recommendations may also be relevant to the global industry. The IMO and Singapore are also working together on a joint initiative called NextGen. NextGen aims to consolidate and ultimately develop a set of global initiatives to decarbonize maritime transport. And the first meeting of NextGen stakeholders will be held later in this conference. Let me now turn to the second area, second frontier, which is digitalisation. This is about bringing a broad and profound transformation across every aspect of our lives, including maritime. Earlier this week, I announced that Singapore was launching operational trials for Phase 2 of Digital Port at SG. This provides a single platform for all vessel-related transactions, or what the industry call maritime single window. We are already saving the industry about 100,000 man-hours per year with Phase 1. Phase 2 will enable customers to access just-in-time marine services such as bunkering. This will enable ships to turn around faster and reduce the emissions by ships in port. The merits of a maritime single window are inherently constrained if only adopted at one port. That is why Singapore has partnered the IMO to initiate Project SWIFT, or Single Window for Facilitation of Trade. Project SWIFT aims to build a maritime single window system for developing countries to digitize their port clearance processes. Last month, the IMO invited interested member states to apply to participate, and a suitable pilot country will be selected soon. We are still at a nascent stage of fully leveraging the potential of digitalization, and we must continue to collaborate with one another to ensure that digitalization in maritime is inclusive and that we can fully unlock its benefits for global trade. The maritime sector is global in nature, and so are the frontiers we must face together. In decarbonization and digitalization, a collaborative spirit is most needed in our global village. The IMO plays a critical role to build that international consensus on our collective responses to our shared challenges. With a deep commitment to collaboration, we can realize a better future of shipping together, and by weaving this ever stronger global maritime community across the oceans, we can bring goods and people from far away ever closer together. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for sharing with us what Singapore is doing to secure a better maritime future, not just for Singapore, but for the global maritime community. I would now like to invite Mr. Kitak Lim, the Secretary General at the International Maritime Organization, to deliver his keynote speech. Mr. Lim, please.
Thank you, Moderator. Minister Ong Ye Kung, Transport Ministry of Singapore, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you today to this important Future of Shipping Conference jointly organized by IMO and the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. This event is in furtherance of IMO's effort to be a forum for discussions and development of innovative solutions on the key topics that will shape the future of shipping: digitalisation and decarbonisation. Before addressing these topics, I wish to take this opportunity in the presence of key players in the maritime industry to highlight the ongoing impact of the COVID pandemic on seafarers' well-being. We have seen an improvement in the number of seafarers that remain stranded on board the ships and those waiting to join ships since the start of the year. But the crisis is still far from over. Over 200,000 seafarers still remain stranded. Recognizing seafarers as key workers and prioritizing their vaccination will help facilitate the seafarers' safe movement across borders. IMO, along with our member states and the industry partners, continues to advocate for seafarers throughout 2021 with our World Maritime theme of seafarers at the core of shipping's future. This focus, along with our discussion of a fair future of seafarers for our Day of the Seafarer celebrations, will spotlight the challenges that these maritime professionals face. And I would like to express my deepest gratitude to all IMO member states that have designated seafarers as key workers, and I would encourage all others to follow suit. I would also ask you for your support in the efforts to facilitate the vaccination of seafarers. In this regard, I would like to recognize Singapore for their collaboration with the IMO and the industry stakeholders to secure vaccines to a network of seaports that can assist in the vaccination of international seafarers. Seafarers cannot work from home, unlike many of us who have seen the benefits of the technology for remote working. But the shipping needs digitalisation, as mentioned by Minister. Exchange of information between ships and ports over digital platforms is mandatory under IMO's facilitation convention and is efficient and COVID secure. Digitalisation is a solution, but the challenge is to ensure it is fully implemented across all nations and all ports. The wider endorsement of the maritime single window concept is needed to strengthen efficiency by allowing submission of all information required by various government agencies through one single portal, streamlining port activities to benefit the supply chain. IMO's Facilitation Committee is preparing amendment to Facilitation Convention to make the use of the single window system mandatory, with anticipated adoption in 2022. Preparation for this is essential. IMO has developed a generic open source single window for small ports with Norway. We are now also working with the Maritime and the Port Authority of Singapore on a pilot project to develop the single window system for member states with the bigger ports, known as the single window for facilitation of a trade project, or it is called SWIFT. Sharing experiences and know-how is vital to ensure that no country is left behind. More advanced use of the pre-arrival information can also assist in reducing emissions from ships with just-in-time arrival. This leads us on the biggest challenge of our time, which is the fight against climate change. IMO's initial GHG strategy has set the course to phase out GHG emissions from shipping. We must build on the achievements so far. IMO adopted the first mandatory measure to improve energy efficiency of new build ships nearly 10 years ago. This June, IMO is expected to adopt important short-term measures to cut carbon intensity of all ships. The adoption of any mandatory measures is being supported by a comprehensive impact assessment of the measures on states, paying particular attention to the needs of developing countries. We will also see key discussions on how to structure the work plan in relation to GHG matters, as well as a proposal from member states and industry for candidate mid and long-term measures to incentivize the move away from fossil fuels to low carbon fuels to achieve decarbonization of international shipping. Shipping will undoubtedly need new technologies, new fuels, and innovation. There needs to be investment in R&D, infrastructure, and the trials. Besides the regulatory development, IMO wants to further promote and accelerate research and development into low and zero carbon marine fuels, which was very much well explained by the minister in the previous speech. We want to build partnerships between stakeholders among public and private sectors, not only in the shipping and the port industry, but also private and development bank and academia. We need even more commitment from stakeholders, donor countries, partners, and industry, so that our capacity building work and various partnership projects continue to support developing countries. Our ongoing partnership initiatives include the IMO EU Global MTCC Network Project, the IMO Norway Green Voyage 2050 project, and each global industry alliance, the IMO Republic of Korea GHG Smart project, the IMO UNEP Maritime Innovation Forum, the IMO EBRD World Bank Fin Smart Roundtable, and the IMO Germany Blue Solutions Project for Asia. These all have one common goal: to strengthen partnerships, build capacity, and accelerate innovation and technology uptake, and to address the decarbonization challenges faced by developing countries, in particular the small island developing states and least developed countries. And IMO is pleased to partner with Singapore on our Next Gen initiative, where GEN stands for Green and Efficient Navigation. Next Gen will create a collaborative global ecosystem of maritime decarbonization initiatives, aiming to facilitate information sharing on decarbonization initiatives and to identify opportunities and the gaps. We want to focus on collaboration on initiatives that address the needs of developing countries. I'm very pleased that the inaugural Next Gen workshop will take place later today. No single stakeholders can make decarbonization of shipping a reality by acting alone. This conference and the next gen workshop are significant in bringing together many different stakeholders in the maritime sector to achieve a common goal. We all have a part to play in addressing challenges and pushing blue sky thinking to develop and implement solutions. To keep pace with the demands of the global economy and expectations for sustainable growth, the maritime world needs to be in the forefront of a transformational change. We need to facilitate decarbonization and enhance digitalization for safer, more environmentally friendly and efficient shipping. We need to work together to combat climate change through development of low and zero carbon fuels. At the same time, we need to utilize the opportunities brought on by digitalization to facilitate frictionless and efficient shipping in support of global trade and across the supply chain. Meeting these ambitious goals will require cooperation and collaboration of all maritime stakeholders so that we can develop innovative solutions together. This is a very timely and a very meaningful conference to discuss and exchange views on these key policy issues, bearing in mind recent development related to the climate change issues. I wish you all a very successful meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary General. It is heartening to know that IMO is strongly committed to putting maritime at the forefront of transformational change. Indeed, the decarbonization of international shipping will require globally coordinated solutions. So how do we translate this into concrete actions? Our stakeholders from across the energy and maritime value chains will share what they think needs to be done. Now, first in this session, we have Mr. Andreas Somenpao, Chairman of BW Group and Co-Chair at the International Advisory Panel of Maritime Decarbonization. Mr. Somenpao will share some of the key findings and recommendations by the International Advisory Panel on Maritime Decarbonization and what Maritime Singapore can do to support decarbonization within the industry. Mr. Somenpao, please.
Greetings to you all. This week, we published the recommendations of the International Advisory Panel on Maritime Decarbonization, and I'm pleased to be sharing our key findings with you today. The full report is available on the Singapore Maritime Foundation website, so I'm going to frame my comments today around 4 key questions. One is, why did we set up this International Advisory Panel? The second is, what is the goal and vision? The third is, what are the most important elements of our proposal? And finally, what comes next? Why did we set up a panel like this? Well, the initiative was formed with the belief that we all need to play our part in the global drive to decarbonize, with IMO playing a leading role. And as we just heard from Singapore's Minister of Transport, Singapore as a nation has a vision and commitment to decarbonize. But to make it happen, you need collaboration between many players and you need an action plan. And that is what the IAP was set up to do, not to write a thought paper, but to come up with an action plan and ways forward. What is our goal or vision? Well, when you have an aspiration, you need a specific target. And rather than forming new targets of our own, we link them to IMO's targets. Reducing emissions by 50% in absolute terms by 2050 is an ambitious goal when you consider the likely growth in world trade and fleet size over the next 30 years. We also recognize that some people feel that we need to go even faster than that. And we have therefore said that we will try to exceed the IMO goals for 2030 and 2050 if we can. Just as IMO itself has said that we should target net zero as soon as possible within this century. We will do this by focusing on measures, standards, innovations, infrastructure, incentives, and bringing together stakeholders. What are the key elements of our proposal? Well, in order to put a framework around this list of objectives, we came up with 4 strategic objectives and 9 pathways under them. And you'll note that the objectives are all action words: harmonize, finance, collaborate, and implement. Implement is really what it's all about, but there's no point implementing if you're not measuring the right things. And it's hard to implement without thinking about where the funds are going to come from. And implementation is, of course, much more effective if you can bring together the right stakeholders. So these 4 objectives work hand in hand with each other. Turning to the details, I'm just going to highlight a few. Again, the report is available in detail, so you can all read them, and you can read faster on screen than I can speak. So I'm just going to highlight the key ones. With measurements, the first one, there is always a risk that you fix one problem and create another one. In other words, that we push the problem somewhere else rather than actually fixing it. And you therefore have to look at life cycle cost. You have to look at the full supply chain. You also need to have a way to measure, report, and benchmark in a robust and trusted way, which is where IT can help with that. On our second pathway, in order to progress to action, you need to have reliable standards for data and for safety. Also, one of the interesting opportunities here in shipping is just-in-time arrivals. Those of you who are familiar with how the industry works, we often rush into port just to wait once we get there, and that burns a lot of fuel, creates a lot of emissions. And it would be better if we can time our arrivals to be just in time and burn less fuel. It seems obvious and simple, but there are a lot of players who need to make something like this happen. There are contractual obligations, there are differentiated incentives. You have the port, you have the customers, you have the shipping companies, and so this needs an all-stakeholder approach. On the third pathway, we recommend to design and implement pilot projects so that we can try out new solutions, and then to share insights where possible so that we can scale up. The fourth pathway is to build flexible ship capabilities and relevant infrastructure. And we think that Singapore is well placed to think through the infrastructure needs for decarbonisation, being the world's largest bunkering port, in addition to considering the flexibility we need on the ships for a multi-fuel future. And of course, this is not just about one port, but there needs to be a conversation between many ports so that we can build the infrastructure we need. The fifth pathway is to develop green financing mechanisms. I mentioned earlier, if you want to decarbonize, you need to consider where the funding will come from. And our recommendations refer to financing schemes, leasing schemes, and ideas to close the gap between existing and new fuels. Pathway 6 is to develop mechanisms to support carbon pricing, and we believe that there should be a carbon cost included in the price of fuel. If we make progress on that, we will need mechanisms to verify and collect the funds, and we will also need to think about, under Pathway 7, ways to channel the funds back into decarbonization so we can create a virtuous circle. We believe that Singapore can play a role as a trusted partner in that. Pathway 8 of the 9, this is a repeated theme around collaboration, and it requires this coalition of players, including ports that I mentioned. It requires good communication flows, and our recommendations and proposals cover this. The 9th and last recommended pathway, which was announced this week and has the support of key players, including the Singapore government, is the establishment of a decarbonisation centre in Singapore to coordinate and continue the work. And that brings me to my last question, which is what's next? The report has been submitted to the Singapore government, and it is being published on the Singapore Maritime Foundation website. We have started work on the Decarbonisation Centre. We also have in process a total of 15 collaborative initiatives underway, which cover trialing of new fuels, just-in-time operations, reporting mechanisms, onboard carbon capture, and a host of others, which again are in the report, because we said, let's make sure that there are some real actions, real coalitions that come together to work on this. And we will keep working now to drive concrete actions towards our goal in support of the vision to mitigate the industry's impact on climate change. Please do help us if you can. And please reach out, whether it's to the new center as it gets established, to the Singapore Maritime Foundation, to the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. I should close here by thanking you all for listening, and also extending very sincere thanks to my fellow IAP members who called in from around the world at all hours, to my co-chair, Wong Weng Sun, to the Singapore Maritime and Port Authority and Singapore Maritime Foundation, particularly the team members who helped to produce the reports, and to the founding partners of the Maritime Decarbonisation Centre that we're setting up, who have stepped forward with a capital commitment. We hope new partners, we're in conversation with new partners, and we hope new partners will step forwards also, whether it's with capital or in-kind contribution or participating in some of these collaborative projects. We really hope to make this a global coalition and tackle this together. With that, I will close my remarks, and thank you very much again for tuning in, and please do join us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Soman Pao, for that rallying call to get more players involved in the maritime decarbonisation, as well as for highlighting the 9 pathways to decarbonisation and its corresponding action plans. Our next speaker is Mr. Nick Ryan, the Vice President for the Operated Fleet at BP Shipping. Nick will present on shipping's role in enabling a greener future and what actions the industry can take to achieve IMO's decarbonisation goals. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Ryan. I'm the VP Operated Fleet for BP Shipping. I've been at BP for 9 years in various leadership and technical roles, and my seafaring experience comes from 18 years as a marine engineer officer in the Royal Navy. I'd like to thank MPA and the IMO for the opportunity to speak at today's conference. Like all other sectors, the maritime industry is faced with a significant challenge to decarbonise. So, what is shipping's role in enabling a greener future? I will share some thoughts and proposed actions on how we might improve the impact of shipping and how our industry might work together towards decarbonisation. Before I go through my slides, I'd like to share our standard disclaimer. "2020 was indeed an extraordinary and challenging year. The world was faced with an unprecedented degree of economic disruption, with GDP declining dramatically. Even today, the impact of COVID-19 continues to threaten recovery in many countries. For all of us, the extent of disruption has been quite shocking. We saw oil prices decline to record low levels in April, and the industry was faced with unprecedented levels of demand destruction. This came as the virus forced curtailment of air and sea travel, with people having to adjust to working from home where possible, and significant restrictions in social activities. Although the pandemic is still far from being under control in some countries, if we look beyond the current situation, we at BP continue to believe in the story of economic growth and progression for the next 30 years. The growth in global activity and prosperity is underpinned by continuing high levels of urbanization, mainly in developing countries in Asia. The expansion in activity is supported by an expected population growth of around 2 billion. More importantly, from higher productivity, we expect GDP per head and hence prosperity to grow. This will drive around 80% of the expansion that you see here in global GDP over the period. At BP, we knew 2020 was going to be a year of change for our company, albeit for quite different reasons than the pandemic. Last February, we launched our new ambition to be a net zero company by 2050 or sooner and help the world to get there too. We are accelerating our transition from an international oil company focused on producing resources to an integrated energy company focused on delivering solutions for customers. Over the next decade, we plan to be a very different company. The three focus areas of activity are low carbon electricity and energy, where we intend to increase our energy investment tenfold to around 5 billion a year, convenience and mobility to help accelerate the global revolution in mobility, and resilient and focused hydrocarbons, which are key to our transformation and whose cash flows enable all of this strategy. And we seek to differentiate ourselves and amplify value through integrating energy systems along and across value chains, partnering with countries, cities and industries as they shape their own paths to net zero, and innovating with a strong focus on digital to create efficiency. Also in March, we launched our sustainability report and introduced 10 new aims, 5 for people and 5 for the planet. These sit alongside the 10 climate-related aims we set in February last year to support our purpose and net zero ambition. So, the big question for shipping is, what is our role in decarbonisation and how do we build back greener from the pandemic? Despite the devastating effects, it has not weakened our resolve nor distracted us from what we started last February. Instead, it's given us a glimpse of what a lower carbon future may look like. And the signs are we are not the only ones who are seizing on this opportunity. We see an increased focus on climate in society, among our employees and with our customers. And governments are converging on this also, as they prepare to spend an estimated 1.7 trillion on a green economic recovery. But here too, the pandemic has some lessons. It's been a sad reminder that where shipping is out of sight, it's often out of mind. Last year, seafarers across our industry have been left vulnerable at sea without sustainable solutions to crew change. Only through extraordinary efforts could we reunite crew members with their families. On climate change, we cannot be similarly overlooked. Around 80% of the global trade is carried by sea, and this has been growing in line with the global economy through the decades. To explore the energy transition to 2050, BP produced the Energy Outlook report last September that considers 3 scenarios of fall in carbon emissions. They are rapid, net zero, and business as usual. If you look at the chart on the left, CO2 emissions from international shipping accounts for around 2 to 3% of global carbon emission. While it may be lower compared to other sectors, if you look at the chart on the right, we expect the demand for marine services to increase in the next 30 years in both the rapid and BAU scenarios. Growth in shipping is driven by increased levels of trade, which is underpinned by increased global prosperity. As global trade increases, emissions from shipping could increase between 50 to 250% by 2050 if we do nothing. So how can we improve the environmental impact of shipping and work together towards decarbonisation? Firstly, by taking actions ourselves. Each company's pathway to a lower carbon future will of course be different. At BP, we have taken action during construction to optimise hull form and ensure equipment fit in our ships is such that it increases efficiency. We are taking further action now to use data better to make smarter interventions to manage hull and propeller efficiency better. We are also investing in advanced hull coatings and energy saving devices. We also started a project to install new technology to measure methane emissions for all LNG carriers. And we've also been conducting biofuel trials since 2019 with success in emission reductions. Lastly, none of this is easy, so we will need to form partnerships with the best in the industry. We are a member of the Global Maritime Forum and Getting to Zero, and we've also signed up to the Neptune Declaration and are reviewing our involvements in some other important initiatives. Through such collaboration, we hope to jointly develop actions to tackle the global challenges we face in the maritime industry. The measures I have mentioned above will help reduce our carbon emissions from shipping operations. Longer term, we need new technology and low or zero carbon fuels, plus the infrastructure to deliver net zero. Fuel choice will be an important part of the marine sector's decarbonisation journey. Whilst we use fuel oil or distillate today, increased use of other fuels such as LNG or biofuels is likely to take place in the medium term to 2030. This will help reduce the carbon output and serve as a bridge towards a lower carbon intensity future. In BP, we have been conducting biofuel trials since 2019, and that has demonstrated a reduction in emissions. We intend to expand our customer trials and offer biofuel blends as part of our portfolio going forward. I would like to now share an example of a recent trial on board our ship, British Captain, which utilised a B30 and then B50 bio VLSFO blend. Play the video, please.
It is that end customer demand that is ultimately driving this market. Companies like IKEA and Nike, they want to ship goods now at zero carbon, but technology to do that with ships is up to 10 years away.
The key aim of the biomarine trial was to run 2 grades of biofuels and to understand what the impact would be on CO2 emissions, and also to check whether there could be any implications for the vessel for running biofuels over a longer period of time. The results from the trials are really interesting. So the British Captain ran the B30 and the B50 grades between October and December last year, and we were able to see a clear reduction in CO2 emissions from the vessel. In fact, 845 tonnes is a reduction, and that's the equivalent of 8 return flights from London to Amsterdam. If the British Captain had run on, say, B30 for the whole of 2020, that would have been a reduction of 6,458 tonnes of CO2 emissions. So I think it's just really clear for us that sustainable biofuels do have a role to play in reducing carbon emissions across the marine sector.
The market itself has been active probably for just over a year and a half in ports such as Rotterdam and Antwerp. Going forward, we expect that to increase in scope and ultimately combining our marine footprint with our biofuels business in many more of our marine locations. So the shipping trials are really important, not only for us, but for our customers, in knowing that we're prepared to put our money where our mouth is and that we're credible in the discussion to lower the carbon intensity of the goods that we sell, but also to generate significant additional margin to trading and shipping in the years to come.
Like biofuel blends, LNG is also a transition fuel and is gaining much momentum with customers now committing to dual fuel ships, and organisations with LNG capabilities such as BP have an opportunity to use their expertise to build supply and logistics capability in selected locations around the globe. In the longer term, hydrogen, ammonia and other fuels could be considered as future low or no carbon fuel solutions. A significant amount of work is required, however, to develop the right infrastructure, supply capability and industry procedures to ensure they are safe, efficient and economically viable. All these fuels may feature as part of the fuel mix solution going forward. We all know that security of energy depends on diversity, but recognise that cost is likely to be a barrier to any switch to a low carbon fuel. One of the actions that could help is for leading global ports to incentivise the use of low carbon fuels. For example, to subsidise cost of fuel through tax rebates or through the reduction of port dues. Another may be the provision of technical funding for companies to develop pilot trials. Any adopted framework should be technology neutral and goal-based, should not incentivise specific fuels, and should be aligned with the IMO decarbonisation objectives. We also need to ensure the certainty of investments in both ship and land-based infrastructures. This is where being at the centre of government is important, working with government and IMO to create the environment for decarbonisation. The existing Ship Energy Efficiency Index, or EEXI, is a good example of industry and regulators working together to keep the GHG conversation moving in the right direction. We also need to build a longer-term policy framework that supports investments in sustainable marine fuels and carbon pricing measures, such as a taxation and emissions trading or regulation. or carbon intensity standards, where carbon pricing measures alone is insufficient to incentivize the uptake of sustainable marine fuels. We believe that regulation through the IMO is the optimal route to avoid any regional distortion. Countries and regions going further should build on existing IMO regulation, but seek to integrate policies back into that legislation. The shipping industry can transform. The 2020 transition to low sulfur fuels is one example where we did. It involved multiple stakeholders across the shipping and energy sectors and dozens of others across an entire industry supply chain. At the start of the process, there were many concerns raised, which include fuel availability, cost, quality, and storage. Also, the cost of investment to refiners and blenders for new technologies to produce a range of fuels was raised. But we worked together to navigate the transition. The decarbonisation of the marine industry will, of course, be a greater challenge. It will require close collaboration and collective actions within the industry and between other sectors such as energy, infrastructure, and finance, with the appropriate support from government and international organisations. Partnerships are critical to our strategy in BP as well. We recognise that none of us have all the answers. We need to learn, collaborate, and pool expertise, innovation, and investment. Last February, we set up regions, cities, and solutions to focus on partnerships with countries, cities, and industries. Similar to the marine industry, a city is a complex ecosystem with multiple nodes, including consumers, businesses, and government, which need support to implement change. As a result, we signed an agreement with the City of Houston to provide planning advice as part of their Climate Action Plan. We also signed an agreement with the Energy Transition Corporation for the City of Aberdeen to support their ambition to become a climate positive city. Aberdeen is positioning itself as a world-leading hydrogen hub. As a traditional oil and gas employment market, Aberdeen is a great example of how working in partnership could support reskilling the workforce and sustaining local economic development through the energy transition. On the industrial side, we're focused on heavy transport sector and pursuing similar partnerships in the maritime sector. We are seeing an increasing number of public and private initiatives being launched in maritime. Due to the scale of the challenges and the multi-layered solutions, the decarbonisation journey will of course take longer than Sulphur 2020. We should treat it as a series of hurdles and challenges that have to be taken on consistently and at the right pace, rather than seeing it as one big hurdle to be tackled in one go. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nick. You've raised some really good key points over there. It really is about taking action, unlocking the power of data, as well as striking partnerships with some of the best in the industry to accelerate decarbonization. So thank you. Now let's hear from our next speaker, Mr. Brian Ostergaard Sorensen, the Vice President and Head of Research and Development at Two-Stroke Man Energy Solution. Brian will share with us an engine designer's perspective on the ways forward to low and zero carbon shipping. Brian, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for listening in. My name is Brian Ostergaard Sørensen, and I'm sitting as mentioned as head of R&D for the Two-Stroke business side in MAN Energy Solutions. I would like to thank the Singapore MPA and IMO for giving me the opportunity to speak here, and I will focus a little on you can say what could pathways towards zero carbon be from an engine designer's perspective. So as has already been mentioned, you can say shipping is responsible for a rather significant amount of global emissions on CO2. But we need to keep in mind that shipping is by far the most efficient form of transportation still. But we need to do something. We need action is required, and from MAN Energy Solutions, we are committed to help drive the decarbonization, this energy transition together with partners, because it is truly a global challenge, and it requires global solutions. So looking at it from an engine's designer's perspective, you can say, is this a threat or is it an opportunity? Within MAN, we think it's actually an opportunity, but there are some key requirements that needs to be met when we look at technology and the future requirements for propulsion systems. There's something around the life cycle cost. What is the efficiency of the solution? What is the fuel consumption? What is the maintenance cost? What is the robustness, the flexibility, and is it possible to retrofit? Is it possible to secure your asset for the future should the requirements change? And then, of course, the last thing that is very important is that we need to have an end-to-end view. So we need to make sure that the life cycle assessment from well to wake is positive. And I think it was already mentioned, we should not push the problem somewhere else, but we actually need to make sure that we deal with it throughout the chain. So looking ahead, mastering this fuel complexity will be a key factor for success. We believe we have the technology available now, and I will show you a little more detail later around that. But it is important to work together to deal with this challenge. So an example of how could a pathway to low carbon emission look like. Here we have looked a little back in time and seen, you know, what has happened over the years, and when we look at a vessel and the evolution there has been, it is evident that technology and operational measures will not do it alone. We need to look into alternative fuel to close the gap if we really want to lower the emissions from the vessel. I think a lot of initiatives are going on in the industry, and we want to be part of that solution. But an alternative fuel, a new fuel type, is needed in order to close the gap. So what could the fuels towards carbon neutrality look like? This is, you can say, an area of different fuel types that could actually go towards carbon neutrality. And then using the current fossil diesel or MGO as basis, biofuel has already been mentioned as a viable option. We see current technology being able to burn this without major challenges. I think it's good to see that we are looking into the robustness. What does it mean long term, and so on. So I think that's important. Looking at some of the other alternative solutions like LNG or the synthetic LNG, there are different pathways towards carbon neutrality. But I think here the beauty with some of the fuel is actually that you could start off with a fossil-based solution, for a fossil-based fuel today, and then you could gradually drop in the green part, and that actually provides, I think, a viable transition pathway for a ship owner. So investing today, you would actually be able to secure the future of your asset. And I think some of these fuel will give you that opportunity to do so. Looking at the challenges, some of the future fuels that has been mentioned, like methanol or ammonia or hydrogen, they carry some inherent challenges in either how we produce them, how do we make them available at scale, or how do we actually handle them on board. And these are some of the technical challenges that needs to be dealt with in the development. And of course, what is the cost of this alternative fuel? How do we finance it? What solution should I, as a ship owner, select? And here we have made an internal assessment. What would the cost look like? So you can say there is a difference. If we look at the fuel production and the handling cost, then hydrogen requires quite high cost of handling. The production cost might not be that high, but handling, storing it on board as a solution for deep sea shipping is challenging, and we foresee there could be large costs involved with that. If you go to e-diesel, for example, synthetic diesel, that would be easier to handle on board, but the production cost would be higher. And looking at the technology on board, the fuel supply system, the engine on board, then we actually see that the engine cost for a hydrogen engine would be higher than, for example, a diesel engine that is known today. But we do not foresee it to be significantly higher than, for example, an ammonia engine. LNG is already an established technology in the market. Methanol as well. I'll show a little around that. But I think what sort of our study tells us is that the optimum will most probably be very dependent on vessel type. Where is the vessel trading? What region is it trading in? What is the trading scheme? Is it a network trading? Is it more tramp trading? So we expect that a variety of fuels will need to be there. So when we look a little back in time and we see how has the transition actually started, we have seen a gradual uptake of dual fuel technology, and this graph basically show, you can say, the HFO, so we can call it the conventional engine type, and then the dual fuel. And what we actually see is that it's gaining momentum. It is accelerating as we speak, and I think that was also when we look at some of the initiatives that has been mentioned. It is clear that it is gaining momentum, and we actually see now that around 35% of the engines ordered with MAN today are dual fuel here in 2021. LNG being the major part, taking the major part of that. But we also see that LNG has actually there is a reduction potential in LNG. So compared to diesel fuel, we actually think it's a good solution, and it could be an important first step in being a bridging technology. And if you then start to drop in, for example, synthetic methane, then that is one option towards zero carbon neutrality. Or you could actually retrofit the engine to a methanol or an ammonia engine later on. So it will give you some opportunities, some choices down the road. And what we see, and some of the questions we have asked ourselves, is that the current COVID-19 situation, has that actually accelerated this transition? Will we see an uptake in alternative fuel accelerated by the COVID-19 and the changes in supply chains and so on? So when I look at the reference list we have today, you can see from this one that is taken from April. It is evident that LNG plays a major role and is actually the dominant fuel type that is on the market or is currently on order. Methanol, ethane, and LPG are all out there in certain, you can say, in certain quantities. And I think we have today around 1.7 million running hours. So it is an industry established technology, these fuel types mentioned here. We actually think that this is it's scalable solutions, all of them, and the future, of course. Then what is next? But 1.7 million running hours. We consider this as technology readiness level 9 for those of you who is considering that. So established technology is already available. So the forecast we actually made last year, you could say, is we ask ourselves, of course, were we too conservative if today the amount of dual fuel engines, engines being ordered is already 35% here in 2021, we estimated 20. Then I think what we can say is that it's accelerating faster than what we expected only 12 months ago. But what we also see is that the uptake of of dual fuel is very dependent on which segments you are looking into. So certain segments where, for example, you can utilize the cargo to also burn as a fuel, there we have actually seen a transition much faster in other segments. But what we see is a general trend is that all sectors are changing, but certain segments faster than others. So how have we approached this from MAN point of view? Basically, what we have said is, we need to make sure that the designs are future-proof, that we build in a certain degree of fuel flexibility, because we believe this is where the industry is going. We believe that the vessels you build today might not be running on the same fuel in 10 years' time. So that is why we have seen the different platforms, and we have actually worked a lot with how can you rebuild, how can you retrofit to a different solution. So when we talk retrofit, we are not talking just the push of a button, but it is smaller or larger types of rebuilds of the engine, or maybe you need new tank infrastructure. But this is sort of the philosophy we have. It's just built-in fuel flexibility. And looking, for example, at the MEC, that is our traditional conventional engine, then this one we have said, that can be rebuilt to all the different fuel types we have, and we have actually done rebuilds already to some of the fuel types. So it is here. The possibilities are here. The technology is here, and I think we will just see an increase in that in that space. And maybe to focus just shortly on ammonia and the ammonia engine development we are currently doing together with different partners. Then we started a project in 2019 to look into ammonia as a potential future fuel, and we have set a development timeline up until 24. Where we will have the first engine delivered to the shipyard. That is the current plan we are working towards. So ammonia as a fuel, we believe that technology will be in place, but the question is, will the infrastructure be in place? Will it be a scalable solution? Will you have the green the green ammonia available? So one thing is the technology side. I think we have some good pathways on that, but the question is how quickly can the industry actually get a scalable and also you can say a feasible solution that is also a commercially viable option. Just a little more detail on the ammonia engine development. I will not go into that, but I think one of the things we are looking into currently is the emission abatement. What will happen when we do the combustion? Will we be producing other types of greenhouse gases that are maybe more potent than the CO2? Because we do not want to build a technology where we say, okay, it's carbon neutral, but basically we are creating a larger problem by having other types of emissions that are potent greenhouse gases. So that is something that has to be dealt with, and we are currently working on that very intensively. And of course, the last bullet point, the safety around running an ammonia engine is also paramount, and that has a high focus throughout the project. And we are working together with many different partners and classification societies to look into that. 1 second. So maybe just to summarize here, we think or we believe that the low carbon vessels of tomorrow, they need to be commercially viable. So technology needs to be there, technology needs to be available, but also the infrastructure, the fuel itself needs to be available. And what we also see is that the fuel selection of today, it's not an obvious choice for a ship owner. We at least for now are not seeing one dominant type of fuel in the future. But what we see is a multitude of different alternative solutions. So this fuel flexibility and having an option to rebuild or retrofit your vessel will be paramount. We also, like has already been mentioned, we see that that natural gas, it's here, it's now, and we actually think it's a viable option. It has low pollutant. We see a positive greenhouse gas impact. We need to manage the methane slip. We see future fuels like methanol, ammonia, maybe hydrogen, certain solutions also as future fuels. They will be coming. A lot of work is going into the development, both infrastructure and technology, and on board the vessels. So I think that will come. CO2 pricing, we believe, is a lever that needs to be used for driving the decarbonization, but it must be globally harmonized, we believe. And then the last point is, it's an industry-wide challenge. We need to do this together. So global collaboration is very important. It's paramount to solve this challenge together. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brian. Indeed, the low-carbon vessels of tomorrow must be commercially viable. CO2 pricing has to be globally harmonized. And of course, we need global collaboration in order to achieve that. Big thank you to our speakers for setting the stage for our next panel discussion on decarbonization. Joining Nick and Brian on this panel session is Mrs. Vivian Ramabarath Parasram, the Director and Head of the Maritime Technology Cooperation Center, promoting ship energy efficiency and the reduction of harmful shipping emissions in the Caribbean. Ladies and gentlemen, as we move into our panel discussion, please note that you can pose your questions to our panelists using the Q&A tab on the left-hand side of your screen. Okay, thank you so much. All right, welcome back, Nick, Brian. Hello, Vivian. Thank you so much for joining me for this discussion today. We've had a slew of questions come up from our participants. Thank you very much. And so I'd like to address the first question to you, Vivian. What more needs to be done to ensure that every country is able to play a role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions from shipping? Vivian.
Thank you for that question. It's very important that the world moves together in tandem. And therefore, the developing world is often left behind in terms of infrastructure, in terms of digitalization, in terms of access to adequate technology. So it's very important that current initiatives like the IMO, the GMN project, the Green Voyage projects, all of these projects are upscaled for the region, and also that all the speakers have also spoke about industry collaboration. So really a three-pronged approach that sees government, industry, and academia playing a very important role in moving the developing regions forward to ensure that no country is in fact left behind. It's a very real threat that both Nick and Brian identified, in that you don't want to see the problem being pushed to other regions. That can easily become the reality in countries that do not have adequate enforcement and implementation infrastructure in place. So what we do need really is that alliance between and partnership between the government, the industry, and in more so with the industry, for the purposes of really changing governmental agendas to ensure that we are able to leverage the existing initiatives of the IMO to enhance capacity of the developing world to be able to receive technology, to implement international standards, and to really be part of the decarbonization agenda and not be a problem that needs to be fixed in the future.
So you need a lot of action to be taken on that. And, it does sound like quite a mammoth task, Vivian. You're talking about a three-pronged approach. Governments, industry, as well as academia coming together to move the needle so that developing countries are not left behind and are included in the path towards decarbonization. Thank you so much, Vivian. We have another question now on ports. This is something that I think Brian and Nick alluded to earlier in your presentations. Ports, they do have a very important role to play in ensuring that the right infrastructure is available to accommodate ships that are powered by future fuels. So in that aspect, what advice do you have for ports, and what future fuels should they be prepared for? Nick, let's start with you first.
Thank you. Very good question, and I wish I knew the answer for everyone. I'll be quite honest. I fully agree ports have a very important role to play in supporting and enabling the decarbonisation journey. Hopefully in my presentation I was able to articulate, and Brian did as well, we do feel that the energy mix and the fuel mix in the future will be fairly complex. There will be lots to choose from. And as such, I don't think any one fuel or few fuels will fit all scenarios. Having said that, there's probably a number of short-term scenarios where LNG and biofuels, as one of the few drop-in fuels, will fit in. But beyond that, there are many different potential solutions. Hydrogen and ammonia have been mentioned, and there are many more. And it's very situational. What might fit one industry will not necessarily fit another. If you're a ferry operator operating on a short sea shipping route and you're fully aware of your route, you may opt for integrated electric power and maybe battery technology, and therefore that sort of infrastructure will be important to you. So it's situational, and it needs to be appropriate to the trade as well. As I mentioned in my presentation, regions, cities and solutions, they're also looking at opportunities in terms of infrastructure, not only across cities and solutions, but in terms of infrastructure that may be supporting ports as well. So for shore power, or what we used to call cold ironing. And that's, for those that don't know, when vessels are alongside, and that can, if you provide that power and the power is available, can contribute significantly to overall emission reduction. So no single answer, very situational and lots of options, but hopefully that gives you a good indication of my thoughts.
Yeah, so no silver bullet fuel at the moment, but it is situational, right? You choose what picks and works for you. Brian, let's have you weigh in on this too.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for the question. And I actually completely agree with Nick. Fuel flexibility, future fuel flexibility will be paramount. And we actually see the ports play a very, very important role here. We see it as a chicken and egg problem. Basically, we can design and build the engine, the shipyards can build the ships, but if the fuel and the infrastructure is not available, then it's no good. So we actually think that the ports have an important role to play. A good example could be on bunkering procedures. How do we make it available in a safe way? How can we do the bunkering while doing cargo operations, for example? How do we make it available at the right price to the ship owners? So I think the ports here play a crucial role in making the different fuels a success. But again, we are not able to pick a clear winner. And as Nick mentioned, it will be situational depending on what type of vessels you are trading and regional even.
Brian, you talked about the triple Fs. Future fuel flexibility, that's what we need, right? So our buzzword for today. Vivian, can I get your perspective on this as well? What future fuels do you think, Caribbean ports should be prepared for?
Within the Caribbean, we have LNG providers, and there are some LNG bunkering capacity currently within the region. So I think as a transition fuel, like the rest of the world, the Caribbean can be looking at LNG as a transition fuel. And because we have industrial countries that produces methanol and ammonia as well. These are possibilities as well for the Caribbean region. However, ensuring that ships are capable of uptaking this type of fuel is something that may be outside of the capability of the region, although we do have access to some of these fuels within this region.
So LNG is that transition fuel for you. Thank you, Vivian. Let's pull up another question from our audience. And this question says, we want to get your views on the opportunities for cross-sector collaboration on decarbonization. Brian, what opportunities are out there?
But I actually think that there are many opportunities out here because some of the future fuels we are talking about are, we can call them hydrogen-based. So I think we will be collaborating with other industries, other sectors in actually making enough hydrogen as a base component available. We actually see that that is already ongoing. That for example, talking to various infrastructure providers, they are looking at ammonia, of course, as a potential maritime fuel, but it's also a fertilizer. Could the hydrogen be used for automotive transportation? Could it be used in other applications? What about aviation industry? So I think we are all facing the same challenge, and I actually think we can learn from each other. And as was mentioned in the beginning in the keynote speeches around digitalisation and how to utilize data in different formats, also to reduce the energy consumption is also something we can actually do cross-sector.
Thank you, Brian. And Nick, your thoughts on this, please. Opportunities for cross-sector collaboration and decarbonization.
Great question, and absolutely, I feel there is. You know, had fertilizer and ammonia not been used in the past and the development that took place as a result of that, maybe we wouldn't be talking about ammonia as we are now. So yes, there is absolute opportunity. Our RCS, Region, Cities and Solutions entity, are working in heavy transport, working across maritime, and there are opportunities with cities, with regions, and with different sectors where one can learn from the other. So I do think that there is definite opportunity there in terms of sharing information, sharing knowledge, and in delivering that drive towards net zero decarbonisation of the maritime industry. Yeah, fully support.
Thank you, Nick. Vivian, I think this is quite a subject that you're quite passionate about as well, because there needs to be, as you've mentioned from the beginning, partnerships, right? More people involved in helping developing countries get out of that rut. Your thoughts on this question, please, Vivian.
Definitely, in terms of partnerships, we need that cross-sector collaboration. And of course, there are certain sectors that are certainly larger players in the economic sectors of the Caribbean region and in the developing world. And perhaps they need to be invited to drive the process, to take the lead in the process, and to assist in driving the correct agenda within the government circles to ensure that that the regions are pushing ahead in decarbonization and digitalization. We've mentioned the ports as well, and the ports are key to the maritime sector. And in terms of the information and the technology sector, that sort of collaboration needs to happen. We have agencies like the IDB already investing in improving single electronic windows across the Caribbean. And what we probably need to see is the energy majors, the technology majors, the IT majors, and the port sectors coming together, perhaps a roundtable discussion as to how we can drive the process for improved implementation.
So seeing port sectors come together. On that note, Vivian, very quickly, what is the one key thing MTCC Caribbean would like to see more of, in addition to port sectors coming together to support your work where you're at? It's like a wish list.
Yeah, well, we really need to see legislative reform across the Caribbean region. It is one of our weakest areas in terms of implementation. So definitely investment and capacity in terms of legal and institutional reform is an imperative.
Legislative reform, institutional reforms, an absolute imperative. You know, earlier on, Vivian talked about the LNG as a potential transitional fuel that works for them in the Caribbean. I want to quickly get Nick and Brian's views on this. What are your thoughts on LNG as a transition fuel? You both mentioned quite a bit about ammonia, green hydrogen. Let's start with you first, Nick.
Thank you. So LNG is a transitional fuel. Yes, we are, we use it in our LNG carriers, and it's very successful and becoming ever more efficient. We're seeing lots of movement in the market as well in terms of non-LNG ships utilizing LNG as a fuel. And I see much progress there, lots of investment taking place. And as Brian alluded to, a long time ago, we used to allude to the chicken and egg situation with LNG infrastructure. I think we're beyond that now. I think there's lots of investment, lots of expertise being put into LNG as a marine fuel in different parts of the globe, and BP and other energy companies are putting some considerable time and effort into that. It is a lever that we may consider in terms of our own vessels, but no decision has been made with regard to that just yet. So very much so, LNG as a transitional fuel. I think personally, probably closely followed by hydrogen and ammonia. And there are other options too, and lots of opportunity out there. I guess it's very difficult for any ship owner to know when to join in and which way to go. I don't think it's all about delivering the net zero now or delivering huge GHG reductions now. It's about knowing something about the industry and making incremental change and working with others to do so as well.
That's a key, isn't it? Making incremental change before you decide to switch up your fuels. Brian, your thoughts on LNG as a transitional fuel in the meantime before we move to full hydrogen or ammonia?
We see it as an established fuel as well. So we actually think it's a very viable transitional fuel choice. Looking at it from a technology angle, then you can say the LNG engines are out there. There is an increasing number. It's proven technology. The same goes for the onboard supply systems. I think one of the things we have to deal with is the methane slip. How do we make sure that we deal with that? Again, I think we need to have some harmonized views and harmonized regulations around that. Infrastructure-wise, making it available. We are there. I fully agree with Nick on that. That it's the choice is there. LNG is there now. So yes, it is a good choice for a transitional fuel if we deal with the challenges around methane slip and so on.
Thank you so much, Brian. I want to quickly pull up a question from our audience too. Thank you so much for keeping those questions coming in fast and furious. What is the one biggest hurdle towards the adoption of decarbonisation for the shipping industry? One biggest hurdle, you think, holding us back? Vivian? Well, it's quite tough to choose just that one, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, I think it's the current adoption of technology and the availability of the fuel, even if the technology is available. So I think, and that's closely linked with cost, the cost and the return of investment for all of these transitions. And so it's not just one aspect. I think it's multidimensional, and it's the technology, the fuel, and the cost of the implementation of the new technology.
Cost and implementation of new technology. Thank you, Vivian. Brian? Nick, you have some time to think about it in the meantime. Brian?
I agree with Vivian here on this, but I also now have the luxury, of course, of maybe can add one point, and I think it's the scalability, and you can say if you need to go for a certain fuel, how do you ensure that is also a future solution, and you're not ended up in sort of a dead end. So I think this scalability, having some confidence that the choice you are making is also a future-proof solution, I think that is also one of the things that are challenging, and so you're not ended up basically with a stranded asset.
Yeah, not ending up with a stranded asset. So scalability. So Nick, the options have been taken up: cost and implementation. Scalability.
Okay.
Now to you.
Thank you. I didn't realise I had to choose something different, but let's give it a go. So you know, as we've indicated, LNG and biofuels are already there. Biofuel is there as a drop-in fuel probably. We just need to get that availability and volume so that it becomes available not only in hub ports but globally sorted out. So that for me is key in the immediate. Brian seems to be indicating, and there are many other discussions ongoing, that the technology is there and it's viable. But in terms of it being viable, that's absolutely fine. I'd like to agree with what was said earlier. It's got to be economically and commercially viable too, and safe. It's got to be really safe. We've got to be absolutely sure that before we roll this out, that the fuels we're giving to our ships and the way that they can operate is going to be safe and commercially viable. So I've struggled with the one, but there's a few options there for you.
But that's a very important one. So before we make sure it's commercially viable, safety is key. So fantastic. Thank you so much. And we've got one more question from our audience today. What would be your one key advice to the IMO to ensure global action in achieving its 2050 GHG reduction target? Vivian, let's have you wrap this one up first.
Well, I would love to see that the IMO puts improve support and increase support for some of their existing projects that are pushing the decarbonization agenda. That includes the GMN project and the Global MTCC network and the Green Voyage projects, and assisting the developing world in ensuring that they are not left behind the decarbonization and the digitalization agenda. So that's why I would like to see the IMO emphasizing to ensure that globally we're moving forward in a harmonious way.
Moving forward together harmoniously. Thank you, Vivian. Brian, your one key advice to the IMO.
I think it's very closely linked to what Vivian is saying. I think it's important that IMO, you can say, they show the way forward. I think the shipping being a global industry, we need global solutions, and I think this is where IMO, they really need to go forward to be the front runner here, showing that the path is right. And maybe through these joint collaborations that has already been mentioned, I think they are showing the way. I think a lot of emphasis needs to be put on them. So yes, that would be my advice.
Great advice, Brian. Nick, not that I mean to come to you last all the time, okay? But let's have your thoughts on summing this up, please. Key advice to the IMO.
Thank you. I don't feel well placed advising the IMO, but I'll give it my best. We fully support the IMO GHG targets. BP has a target of net zero by 2050 or sooner. Hopefully that will be possible and we'll meet all those targets and aims. I guess what we don't want is other regions taking action, which then distorts the global shipping market. So it's all about IMO showing active dialogue with all the stakeholders so that the regions are fully aware of what's going on. And if there's an intent to make changes sooner, then the regions don't do anything different. And we are fully aligned to avoid that distortion in the market. Collaboration is key, and I'm sure the IMO and governments will work together with the industry to ensure there's no distortion in the market, and we work our way forwards to a decarbonised industry.
having more collaboration and ensuring there's dialogue. Thank you so much, Nick, Brian, and Vivian, for sharing your wonderful insights with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's very clear that the path towards decarbonization has to include all countries and stakeholders. We must aim for a global regulatory alignment in order to meet the IMO's target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. I think the scale of the challenge is huge, and no sector can do this alone. We also need strong commitment from governments and from industry across the energy and maritime value chain to ensure that low or zero carbon solutions can be made viable and accessible via international shipping. Only when these ideas are translated into concrete action can we reach a level playing field with the alignment of decarbonization targets and timelines. So once again, thank you so much, Nick, Brian, and Vivian. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you.
On that note, let's move on to the second segment of our conference for today, digitalization. We're now witnessing a growing imperative to automate and digitalize the maritime sector. And we are hearing that the key benefits of digitalization can only be realized when all stakeholders are on board. Now we'll hear from speakers on how digital tools are expected to radically transform the way both industry and regulators work. But before we move on to our next speaker, let's watch a short clip on the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore's Digital Port at SG. That is Singapore's maritime single window for all vessel-related transactions. In Phase 2 of Digital Port at SG, all customers will have access to just-in-time marine services, which will enable ships to turn around faster, thereby reducing ship emissions in port. Let's take a look at this video. Ladies and gentlemen, Digital Port at SG in Phase 2. And now we'll be joined by Mr. David Fu, the Assistant Chief Executive of Operations and Technology at the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore, who will share how we can leverage digital tools to improve operational efficiency of ports. David, please.
Well, hello and good day to everyone, and thank you for joining us online. At last year's Future Shipping Digitalization webinar, I shared on the need for a maritime digital ecosystem and APA's commitment towards digitalization through collaboration with like-minded partners from both industry and government. So I'd like to take this opportunity to share some updates on our initiatives, which we hope can make a significant contribution to the future of shipping. As the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore, ensuring the safety and efficiency of navigation for vessels in the Singapore Strait and Singapore port waters have always been a key priority for MPA. We are building the next generation port at Tuas, which will be smart, safe, and sustainable. Focusing our efforts and investments in two critical areas, which you have heard often this week, which is digitalization and decarbonization. With more than 1 year since the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, it has never been clearer that digitalization is indeed a strategic enabler for our smart, safe, and sustainable port. But what does the future of shipping look like? I think a good example can be found in land transportation, and simply look at how digitalization has fundamentally transformed our lives. In Singapore, as in many parts of the world, it's already part of everyday life that we use applications or apps to automatically find us a vehicle to get to our destination with full visibility of cost, the travel time, the driver's attitude to the type and the model of vehicle, etc. Or to order food that we crave to be prepared and delivered at the time that we want it, and using selected mode of delivery, all within a few keystrokes using a smart device. What enables this amazing capability and convenience can be simply boiled down to three things: disruption of traditional workflows, data, and connectivity. But if we just look at the present of shipping, all three key ingredients can be found. But unlike the apps that I talked about earlier, we still haven't been able to find the best recipe for success. Besides redesigning workflows, which must span across platforms and systems, we need data to flow, to be exchanged between different systems, and strong partnerships built upon trust and collaboration between public and private sectors to overcome the key challenges of data exchange. This will help accelerate digitalization that is impactful and beneficial to all stakeholders in the maritime transport chain. On MPA's part, we have built the Digital Port at SG platform, which serves as the one-stop portal for all port-related applications. In phase one, we have successfully operationalized the maritime single window concept, redesigning 16 different forms and workflows amongst 3 public agencies for port clearance, and created a single application for all port users and provided a dashboard facility for full visibility of all application statuses. So at one glance, you can see all the information you need to make the right decisions. This effort in redesigning port clearance alone saves the industry about 100,000 man-hours a year. And we are only just starting. There are many other regulatory transactions that are in the process of being redesigned. With digitalization, we can reduce mistakes, improve quality of information, make better decisions, as well as save time and cost. At the beginning of the week, our Minister of Transport, and you've seen this video too, Mr. Ong Ye Kung, launched the Digital Port at SG Phase 2 operational trials for the Just-in-Time Planning and Coordination Platform, or JIT in short. What JIT aims to do is to harness the power of data and artificial intelligence and empower port stakeholders to become more efficient with both time and resources. With full visibility of a vessel call, ships can make adjustments to berth on arrival, and businesses can better manage their resources and deliver their goods and services on time. This overall optimization and assurance of service levels reduces wastage of resources, hastens turnaround time, and lowers the carbon footprint. After conducting operational trials with different companies and vessel types progressively, we aim to fully operationalize JIT by next year, 2022. And phase 2 will also include the development of an active anchorage management system, which will help to automate and maximize anchorage space planning and allocation. From my experience with Digital Port at SG, we know that shipping and the global maritime transport chain can greatly benefit with more digital ports. To that end, we have implemented Digital Oceans Initiative, which aims to foster interoperability between digital platforms and systems of port authorities, port operators, shipping lines, companies, etc., by exchanging data seamlessly and interoperating through a common set of open data standards and common APIs. We are glad to be working with the Port of Rotterdam and PSA International, as well as major platform providers such as Cargo Smart, Global E-Trade Services, and Maersk's GTD solution, which is part of the TradeLens collaboration. Another aspect of the future of shipping can also be seen in the development of automobiles. Yes, the evolution of cars from horse-drawn carriages in the past to fully mechanized and now to even battery-powered is certainly innovative. But what I think is more amazing is the ability to do software upgrades on a regular basis, which will make the car even smarter and more capable. Imagine if the future ships can be regularly updated in a similar way. So this is where MP's Digital Ship Initiative comes in, and where we aim to advance shipshore digitalization and widespread use of automated and autonomous systems at sea. With ship-to-shore connectivity and data exchange, ships will have access to more information, digital services, and in time to come, even software upgrades. Before I get into the digital ship initiatives, let me explain a little bit about e-navigation, which is defined by the IMO as the harmonized collection, integration, exchange, presentation, and analysis of marine information on board and ashore by electronic means to enhance berth-to-berth navigation and related services for safety and security at sea and protection of the marine environment. To support this, IMO launched the e-navigation strategy implementation plan. Now, this plan outlines 5 key aspects of the solution for e-navigation and essentially aims to go into standardization and to make available information in graphical displays to improve communications with vessel traffic services. Thus, in line with IMO's e-navigation strategy, MPA's digital ship initiatives aims to test bed various ship-to-shore harmonization and interoperability projects, with the goal to ensure that the Port of Singapore remains forward-looking and future-ready. Let me share some aspects of this initiative and how they fit into the larger ecosystem. First, connectivity at sea. To support the push for ship-shore digitalization, we recognize the criticality of high-speed, low-latency, and high-bandwidth digital connectivity in our port waters. Take, for example, remote pilotage, where we could innovate and build an advanced bridge simulator for pilots to work from ashore instead of on board a ship. But it will not become a reality without reliable connectivity. Today, we have mobile 4G coverage within our port. In some of our project test beds, we have already found some limits in supporting video-heavy applications. So it's clear to us that to support our digitalization and smart applications between ship and shore, we must look to newer communication technologies such as 5G and even satellite. In terms of 5G, we are making progress to test maritime 5G applications. This is done in close collaboration and consultation with our Infocom Media Development Authority of Singapore and our local mobile network operators. We hope to understand the potential of 5G for drone surveillance, maritime autonomous surface ships, remote pilotage, and even telemedicine, which has been very useful under the current COVID-19 pandemic situation. And to give you an example, a few days ago, we announced the opening of our maritime drone estate at the Marina South Pier and demonstrated a ship-shore drone delivery of a 3D printed spare part to a vessel. The drone estate will thus facilitate and support test bedding efforts by providing a conducive space for commercial and research entities to conduct drone trials at sea in a safe sandbox environment. There is also 5G coverage in the drone estate for testing purposes. Together, we hope to catalyze more innovative applications in the maritime sector. Next, I will touch on satellite communications, or SATCOM for short. In the past, SATCOM has been perceived to be expensive in comparison with terrestrial communications, and hence only used in the maritime industry where terrestrial communications offer little or no coverage. From MP's perspective, SATCOM can offer many opportunities for us, even close to shore. So we are exploring several possibilities for SATCOM to augment our terrestrial systems, including usage of satellite AIS data and alternative communication links using geostationary, medium, and even low Earth orbit constellations to improve data rates and latency at much lower cost per data unit today. As you already know, global shipping is a vast interconnected network of trade routes. So ship-to-shore operations are no longer determined solely by what happens near the shoreline, but also by ports at which the vessels call en route around the world. The recent Suez Canal incident has only reinforced how interdependent we are as one global maritime community, and maintaining end-to-end visibility of the maritime transport chain with the ability to adjust in real time using data as an enabler will indeed become a game changer. Hence, the increased reach and coverage offered by SATCOM can help us achieve greater visibility. Traditionally, satellite and terrestrial communication systems have been managed as separate systems. in future, I believe there will be greater integration between mobile communications and satellite communications, which is currently being explored by the 3GPP consortium. So we are monitoring the developments in this area closely, as it would open up many new opportunities for true end-to-end broadband connectivity for ships and the ship-shore interface. Under the Digital Ship Initiative, one exciting development that we are championing in terms of the integration of terrestrial and satellite communications is the VHF Data Exchange System, or VDES in short. By design, VDES allows for a more effective and efficient use of the radio spectrum, building on the proven capabilities of the AIS. It can support e-navigation by enabling higher data rates for two-way ship-shore communications. So both terrestrial and satellite VDES work together seamlessly to enable the exchange of data and delivery of digital maritime services. And this opens up many possibilities, for example, to further optimize just-in-time services, not just within the port, but port to port, with real-time data exchange. This can also contribute to sustainability with greener steaming of ships from port to port. Thus far, we have developed a VDES mobile station prototype, and this is currently undergoing testing at the MPA Innovation Lab. To complement the mobile station, our agencies, research agency, for example, A-STAR, as well as the Institute for Infocom Research, is developing the next generation satellite VDES capabilities through the Industry Alignment Fund, which is part of the Research Innovation Enterprise 2020 initiative in Singapore. So, in conclusion, the future of shipping is indeed a bright one, but it hinges on our ability to transform to a more agile and resilient maritime sector, one that is deeply interconnected within a global digital ecosystem that is driven by data sharing and systems interoperability. Digitalization, data exchange, and connectivity work hand in hand to create this future. And MP is committed to do our part through the initiatives of Digital Port at SG, Digital Oceans, and Digital Ship. But we cannot do this alone, but in close partnerships with industry and like-minded fellow port authorities and international bodies. So let us work together towards a smarter, safer, and sustainable future of shipping. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Towards a smarter, safer, and more sustainable shipping industry. Let's now welcome Mr. Robert Ashdown, the Secretary General of the International Association of Classification Societies. Robert is here to share with us why regulatory systems need to be updated and how digital solutions can be better harnessed to achieve a more efficient and safer shipping industry. Robert, over to you.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Yvonne, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm greatly honoured to have been invited here today to speak on behalf of IAX at this IMO Singapore Future of Shipping Conference. IAX is an association comprised of 12 of the world's leading class societies who collectively class over 90% of global tonnage. And a key part of IAX's vision is to be a trusted partner of regulators and industry with respect to the development and application of maritime regulations. And it is very much in that context that I am delighted to be here today. My theme today is that the power of digitalisation needs to be fully leveraged to support the global imperative of decarbonisation, and that this process needs to be supported by a regulatory regime whose architecture is designed to encompass the new challenges and opportunities of an increasingly interconnected global maritime world. This talk, therefore, is essentially an exploration of how data and technology can be applied by the IMO to achieve better regulatory oversight and compliance towards the common goal of decarbonisation. This is a process often referred to as RegTech, but it should be noted, however, that we are not talking about the regulation of technology itself. And as such, my focus today will be on identifying potential ways forward rather than describing how these ideas might be practically implemented. So, why is it necessary to talk about digitalisation as part of our joint efforts to decarbonise the shipping industry? It is because although decarbonisation will be achieved by engineering solutions, the delivery of those solutions, their efficacy, and ship operators' compliance with them will all need to be carefully measured if regulators are to be confident that the industry is on track to meet the goals that it has set, and, if not on track, to provide detailed and specific data as to which sectors within the industry are under or overperforming, so that the regulatory framework can be adjusted accordingly. And it is this anticipated flexibility and specificity that requires a new regulatory approach. Increasing global interconnectivity, brought about by the ever-growing pace of digitalisation, means that using past regulatory approaches to meet the challenge of decarbonisation looks increasingly tenuous. While we are fortunate in already having the IMO as a global regulator setting international standards, as shipping moves from the industrial to the information age, its regulator needs to move with it. IMO's authority and credibility as the universal regulator for global shipping relies on its ability to recognise the societal demands made of industry and to act accordingly. Often, this has been a retrospective application, but by harnessing the benefits of digitalisation, IMO has the opportunity to legislate proactively. But this will require a willingness to recognise new models of governance are required for the challenges that we face today, and that traditional approaches may no longer be applicable. This could be described as overcoming the challenge of regulatory inertia. The IMO has already set clear goals for decarbonisation using data analysis, but the pathway to that goal could change. And were that to happen, the approach to data collection necessary to drive the compliance to achieve those new goals may also need to change. Future regulatory decisions will increasingly need to be taken at pace and in recognition that knowledge gaps and uncertainties will remain, and trade-offs, such as those between environmental and economic objectives, will be inevitable. Digitalisation not only has the potential to provide IMO with the data and information it needs to implement and evaluate the appropriate responses to the decarbonisation challenge, it could also enable the development of a regulatory approach where the focus is on the entire regulatory system, with flexibility to understand that what works well for one sector or area of operation may not be suitable for another, recognising that the shipping industry is really an agglomeration of disparate industries with different needs, drivers, and objectives. We also need to face head-on the fact that there is a knowledge imbalance. Industry expertise is generally far ahead of regulators' expertise, and existing regulatory practices face a challenge to catch up with fast-moving technologies, global connectivity, and multidisciplinary demands. As a result, and if a traditional regulatory approach is adopted, the resulting regulatory response may therefore be misaligned with the reality and be either over or under ambitious, or poorly targeted. Regulatory systems also need to recognise that they are subject to evolving developments within themselves, whereby the expectations of the involved parties regarding the suitability of the system may change over time. One way to correct this asymmetry between the regulator and the regulated is to draw upon the industry expertise available within the industry itself, especially where diverse and multidisciplinary cooperation is required. With 80 NGOs participating in IMO, the opportunity to leverage that expertise clearly exists, and when considering new regulatory approaches, consideration could also be given as to whether industry's input is being optimised by regulators. But we should also be clear that the justification for adopting a new regulatory approach will need to be tailored to the problem at hand, in this case, decarbonisation. A new approach to help digitalisation facilitate decarbonisation is not a call for a wholesale abandonment of IMO's traditional practice for other regulatory issues. Indeed, identifying which issues can be regulated through traditional means and which issues require an alternative or temporary approach is an important consideration, and that process itself may require its own separate decision-making guidance. One element of a new regulatory approach is to use goal-based standards. The use of high-level principles for regulation can be combined with other innovative regulatory aspirations, such as facilitating a proactive rather than reactive approach, enabling experimentation within the system, and providing the ability to reward first movers, and so making the regulator a catalyst for positive change. Such features are just some of the attributes a new regulatory approach should strive to deliver, and digitalisation is the key to allowing IMO to deliver sophisticated legislative tools which are underpinned by the smooth and efficient collection and analysis of data. As a global regulatory body, it is considered that the IMO will increasingly need access to the data that resides within both its member states and individual corporations. But it will also have a commensurate responsibility to ensure that the subsequent application of that data in imposing regulatory demands is not misused. One way to protect against that is to ensure that the necessary data harvesting and application should be for specific purposes and time limited to the achievement of the regulatory goal. It is clear then that identifying, collecting, collating, and analysing the data relevant to the regulatory goal is fundamental to digitalisation's utility as a tool in the decarbonisation process. But with more data, and hence more experience, so too is greater sophistication required in how regulations are then evolved and adapted. As real-world reporting becomes much faster, so it becomes easier to ensure that progress towards the high-level goal remains on track. Instead of using historical experience, digitalisation allows for data to be used to actually drive environmental performance. To leverage this effectively, however, it is again emphasised that a regulatory system-wide perspective is also required, with achievement of the end goal given more emphasis than the individual performance of its constituent parts. Indeed, an iterative approach that allows regulations to be adjusted according to the data may accelerate progress to the end goal, especially given that knowledge gaps will continue to emerge with the development of innovative technologies. Further, allowing regulatory experimentation within the overarching objectives of the desired legislation should be seen as a positive sign of responsiveness. Accordingly, how the data analysis identifies the need for such review and experimentation should also be considered at an early stage of the regulatory development. The prize here is a successful regulatory system that can harness the power of digitalisation to accelerate and support decarbonisation, and so deliver significant benefits to society and business. Conversely, a poorly designed system could introduce additional cost, prevent or delay innovation, and ultimately fail in its stated objective. It is clear then that digitalisation can ease the pathway to a decarbonised shipping industry, with positive benefits both for ship operators looking to improve the efficiency of their fleet and to adhering to their specific trajectory for transitioning to zero emitting ships, and for regulators who require an increasingly sophisticated toolset to ensure the achievement of the high-level goals they have established. As such, consideration should be given to accelerating the digitalisation of the existing fleet so that the benefits of the subsequent data resources can be utilised as quickly and effectively as possible. Of course, this is not easy with such a diversified industry that is truly global in its area of operation and regulated through a multinational consensus-based decision process at the IMO. There are also significant challenges entailed by the uneven penetration of digital technology, the constant security challenges associated with digitalisation, along with fundamental issues around the accessibility of data. Who owns it? Who accesses it? Who uses it? And there are also significant implications to imposing digital technologies onto existing vessels related to cost, assurance with regulatory compliance, and potential market impacts for underperforming vessels. Despite these challenges, and as we look to the future of shipping in which data and data transfer will surely play an increasingly significant role, what sort of questions need resolving in order to position IMO as a data enabler? In my view, these questions should not just cover the specific elements that will help in defining and gathering the appropriate data required for the decarbonisation effort, but should also provoke a thorough analysis of how these new tools can be embedded into a regulatory instrument that is high level, flexible, targeted and proactive, as well as being responsive to evolving developments both within the regulatory system itself and also to as yet unknown external drivers. The temptation here will be to focus on what is needed in terms of data, but for digitalisation to be truly optimised in the transition to a carbon-free shipping industry, the how of regulatory delivery must also be subject to an equally rigorous analysis. The pace of technological development continues to accelerate, as does the interconnectivity of the global shipping industry. At the same time, the window of opportunity in which decarbonisation can be achieved to keep global warming to manageable levels becomes smaller every day. But if we work together to find ways to share the data that we know is an integral part of a decarbonisation challenge, we will end up with an industry that enjoys improved operational performance, a regulatory regime that is better informed, more responsive, and more likely to achieve its goals, and most importantly, a superior environmental performance. The challenges associated with embedding digitalisation into a global regulatory regime are not to be underestimated. But we start with one significant advantage. The vast and disparate world of shipping, of global shipping, is near unanimous in its acknowledgement of the benefits of a single global regulator, the International Maritime Organization. And I believe that IMO will rise to this challenge by becoming a key player in encouraging the efficient collection and sharing of data in support of global shipping's collective interests. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Robert. Indeed, we need to leverage the benefits of data in order to push forward on the digitalization agenda in the shipping industry too. Now, joining David and Robert for our next panel discussion on digitalization, let's welcome Ms. Hadiza Bala Usman, the Managing Director of the Nigerian Ports Authority, and Mr. Darwin Telemack, the Chief Executive Officer of the Antigua and Barbuda Port Authority. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, you may pose your questions to our panelists using the Q&A tab at the left-hand side of your screen. Keep those questions coming in. All right, and let's pull up our guests on screen. Welcome back, David and Robert, and thank you for joining me today, Hadiza and Darwin. I'd like to direct our first question from our audience to Darwin. You know, Norway and the IMO worked very closely with Antigua and Barbuda to establish the maritime single window. Can you share your views with us on, how the successes of Antigua can be regionalized, perhaps to the effect of establishing a Caribbean single window? Darwin.
Good morning to everyone on the panel, and good morning to your viewers. Antigua and Barbuda was blessed with the opportunity from the IMO and supported by the country of Norway with the establishment of a maritime single window. This platform has allowed for the digitalization that is spoken about so well by the previous speakers to actually reach the shores of the Caribbean. As a matter of fact, this process has the opportunity to initiate a major transformation from the physical paper handling into a more effective, efficient system of digital transformation of our industry. We would like to highlight that getting to that position was led primarily by our leader, who took the political will and drove it through the process with great collaboration to everyone. Since then, with the presentation of the source code with the country of Norway to the IMO in 2019, Antigua and Barbuda has extended the opportunity for our regional partners through CARICOM, which is the regional body that integrates all governments throughout the Caribbean. And through CARICOM Impacts and the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, we are now embarking on an ambitious journey to ensure that not only is Antigua and Barbuda engaged in possessing a maritime single window, but all of the regional agencies and countries would be able to be so empowered. Considering that we are all mostly within the same legal framework, and our legislations are very similar. The operational components are really what we have been working on. And with the support of the Caribbean Development Bank, as I mentioned, CARICOM Impacts, the OECS, and most, if not all, of the member states of CARICOM and the OECS, we are engaged in the process of integrating around having all the islands possessing that technology so that we could all engage in the electronic clearance of ships, as Antigua is capable of doing right now. So the effort is to ensure that we extend the gift from Norway and the IMO to our other fellow neighbors and member states in ensuring that the region could become largely an area where most vessels, and in our area we do have quite a bit of vessels. We have a lot of cruise cargo, cruise ships, sorry. We have a lot of cargo vessels and lots of, it's a busy maritime space. And we believe that the advantages and benefits of having, of being able to eliminate the paper and move into digital would certainly enhance our position and place us in a much more productive and efficient position. And we are grateful to be able to be supporting and extending the technology that we have to our neighbors.
Thank you so much, Darwin. I like what you said. It's about extending the gift that Antigua and Barbuda received from Norway and the IMO to your neighbors so that you're able to reap collective digital benefits as a region. Thank you, Darwin. We have another question now for Ms. Hadiza Bala Usman. Could you share with us what Nigeria is doing to digitalize its maritime sector, and what are some of the challenges that you faced in doing so?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the presentation. Within the Nigerian Ports Authority, we're also looking at a similar technical support, as Mr. Darwin has mentioned, that Antigua and Barbuda received from IMO. Nigeria is currently working on deploying its ports community system, which would link it to single windows. It is doing that with the technical support of IMO, which we believe is critical to enable us have the strengthened technical knowledge of the deployment of the ports community system and the consequent single windows. We have, of course, the President has given an executive order for deployment of ports community system and single windows. This is contained within the directive of ensuring transparency and accountability within the ports community and also the shipping industries. So the respective agencies within the environment are required to deploy the necessary mechanism in providing this digitization that is needed to promote safe and secure berthing of vessels, ensure environmentally friendly and efficient port operations. This is being done, recognizing some of the initial deployments that has been made within Nigerian ports. Some of them include the electronic ship entry notice, the Command and Control Communications and Intelligence Facility, the Marine Operations Center, a revenue and invoice management system, which deploys the necessary digitization that is needed to enable us commence the process of having a full ports community system and a consequent single windows. One of the key challenges we have around this deployment speaks to the level of commitment by agencies of government that are required to participate in this implementation. We are concerned, and we have noted the change management consideration as it relates to digitization, and that is a value reorientation challenge that we have with our personnel in recognizing the deployment of digital operations. We've also, as I mentioned, the need for interagency collaboration for the successful deployment of the digital specification. I will speak to the Nigerian Customs Service having a concurrent digitization process that is to a certain extent in isolation of the larger community system. So these are some of the issues that we have where agencies of government are keen to have independent digitization, which may not have the necessary handshake, electronic handshake that would provide the linkage to the larger ports community and the larger deployment of the single windows that would enable the seamless communication required across shipping, across port operations, across cargo clearance. So right now, as I mentioned, our customs service are deploying an e-customs, which we have to work again to see how it can have the interchange and connection with the other aspects of the value chain of the maritime sector. These are the challenges we're having, and also an overview on where we're at on digitization of the maritime sector in Nigeria. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hadiza. It seems that quite a lot of progress has been made on the digitalization front on Nigeria's side. I just want to come back to Darwin now, because Hadiza mentioned some of the key challenges that the Nigerian port authorities have faced, talking about change management as well as deployment of digitalization challenges. Darwin, were these some of the similar challenges that your sector experienced in Antigua and Barbuda, or what is the main challenge, if not?
Once again, thank you. We were lucky, or I could say once again, we were blessed by the fact that the cooperation, interdepartmental cooperation among key government stakeholders seemed to have been brought together quite nicely. There was the mandate from the head of state that I think everyone took very seriously, so there was very little concern about cooperation. However, the process led to signing of a number of MOUs between each stakeholder departments and the Port Authority, so that we had MOUs with customs, we had MOUs with individual agents, the port health, plant health, and so from the broad national landscape, there was a very coordinated and cooperating effort that led to the success of this effort. However, there are technological challenges. There were challenges in terms of the bandwidth and the speed of our internet, some technological issues there. Subsequent to having rolled out the Maritime Single Window, we got into a bit of a challenge as relates to an already established regional practice where most of the data from ships went to a regional body, and individualizing our own digital platform created what ships were complaining, particularly the cruise ships were complaining that there was duplication in the process. They would have to send it to CARICOM impacts, and then they would have to send it to the individual ports. So what we had to do was to work on a regional scale to create that depository through that regional body. We are in the process of doing that. We pretty much almost concluded that. And once that is done, we can get all the data from the ships going from the vessels to that body, which will then disseminate that into the individual single windows, which would lead to what we believe would be a large number of our member states being able now to operationalize the single window. So there is the will, there is the desire. We are overcoming the technological challenge that we all face. All the member states are pretty excited to do it. So we're really having a challenge around more of coordinating and physical, technological challenges. The intent is clear. We as a region, we are determined to improve the interface between the vessels and our ports. We are archipelagic states, and so improving the maritime environment is critical to our existence and our survival for our people. So every step is being made to eliminate some of those. We have eliminated most of the other challenges, and we're moving towards what we think is going to be a very rich environment in terms of the interface between ships and ports very shortly. So we're not in a space where we can speak of an insurmountable number of challenges apart from the ones that I mentioned, which would be technical, mostly technical.
Darwin, thank you. It's really heartening to know that, there is the will, there is the intention of surmounting some of these smaller tech challenges, but really it's just a massive coordinating effort, right? Coordination to get to where you guys want to. So we'll be cheering you on from this part of the world. So do give us updates on the progress over there too. Thank you, Darwin. We've got questions coming in for you too, Robert. So let me read this and bring this up for you. Given the theme of your talk today, Robert, and the progress that IMO is making on delivering its strategy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from shipping, where and when do you see digitalization fitting in to the IMO regulatory process on decarbonisation, Robert?
Yeah, thanks, Yvonne, and that's a great question. And the easy answer would be to say that digitalisation should be ubiquitous across the IMO's regulatory process around decarbonisation. But I think you're probably after some more specifics. So let me give perhaps a couple of examples by way of an answer to that. So I would contend that many of the technology and systems deployed on ships today are enabled to transmit data to the manufacturers so that they can monitor the performance of their product. And as such, it should not require significant technical adjustment to also utilize that data to serve the regulatory purposes that I described earlier in my presentation. At IMO, the short-term measures on greenhouse gas reduction will be adopted by IMO in June, and they will apply from 2023. And that regulation envisages the completion of a review by the 1st of January 2026 to assess the effectiveness of those measures. And this review will undoubtedly require the collection and analysis of data. So we could suggest, therefore, that IMO may therefore wish to explore whether these systems on board the ships could be configured for that data to be streamed from the ships into a single repository to facilitate that analysis of the short-term measures. So that's one aspect. Perhaps a second aspect would be with regards to the mid-term measures. And we need to remember that at the same time as the short-term measures are being implemented, the discussion on the development of mid-term measures is about to start. And I very much feel that the broader aspect of leveraging digital technology to enable the assessment of the effectiveness of those eventual mid-term measures should form a key part of that debate. How do we regulate those mid-term measures? So hopefully, Yvonne, that's a couple of specifics that may help give some more grounding and concrete examples to the ideas that were described in the presentation earlier. Thank you.
Definitely a lot more details there with the short-term and medium-term measures that you highlighted, Robert. We're not letting you off just yet. Someone's brought up the question of your phrase, predictive maintenance. You said that was a possible new solution. So would you be able to share with our audience how predictive maintenance can improve the safety and environmental, improve upon the current approach in safety and environmental regulations, Robert?
Yes, indeed. So at the moment, classification works through a calendar-based system of survey. But increasingly, as we have more data, more sensors giving us real-time information about the systems on board, that data that comes back can sometimes be even more helpful in predicting really when maintenance can take place. And so what we need to understand is how we can work with these new technologies, which are predicting when certain systems need looking at, need maintenance, maybe need changing out, that we're able then to go in and do that at the right time. But in order to be able to do that, we have to look at also making sure that the regulations under which we work are also capable of adapting to these new technologies. And at the moment, SOLAS is very much linked to a calendar-based survey regime with set periods between surveys. And so when we talk about moving to a predictive maintenance, we both need to use the tools of digitalisation, which are telling us what is going to happen, but we need to update the regulations to allow us to move away from that rigid calendar-based regime to one which is more flexible and which can deliver the same results, but in a different format. And of course, always ensuring that safety remains at the very heart of whatever is done in terms of the survey and certification of the vessels. Thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you so much, Robert, for that very concise explanation. And thank you to our audience member who sent that in. I do hope that Robert has addressed that question. Now, we can't talk about digitalization without talking about cybersecurity. David, thank you for your patience. I want to bring you into the conversation as well. This next question for you. What is MPA doing about port cybersecurity?
Well, thank you, Yvonne, for the question. Well, port cybersecurity, I think, looking at the past years, increasingly you've seen quite a lot of incidents happening in the maritime sector. So it's important, and I think it grows even greater in importance because what we're talking about here is digitalization. And when there are more systems out there, what it means is that the number of potential attack services will increase. So as we digitalize, I think the other aspect to really look at is also to actually how do we protect our systems much better. So for MPA, we've been assigned under the legislative regulations to be the sector lead in terms of cybersecurity. And for us, in terms of the different systems, of course, it's impossible to protect all the systems at the same level because it's going to either take too much time or too much resources. So you need to focus on the systems that matter, that is critical in terms of impact. And so for MPA, we are actually working very closely with our stakeholders, for example, the terminal operators and the marine service providers, to look at where the critical systems are and be able to then build I would say three key aspects to strengthen cybersecurity. So number one would be to actually audit the system. So we have a framework to do regular auditing using third-party auditors as well as our own internal and as well as using different software tools to give different layers of cyber assurance. And this forms a very good baseline as to see where the gaps are and where the different stakeholders need to improve in terms of the security of the systems. The second aspect is in terms of building resilience, because it is impossible to prevent attacks in the future. What we need to build is how quickly can we recover from cybersecurity incidents. And hence we actually do exercises with the different stakeholders, looking at their business continuity plans, and to make sure that when attacks occur with the different scenarios, how do you actually recover from such an event to make sure that the customers' systems are also in a way not affected to the extent that if you have not had that early action against such a threat, and to make sure that you can actually go into different modes of operation that minimizes the disruption. The third aspect of cybersecurity is actually time. You need time, and it's best if you could get an indication of attacks which are imminent. Now, in terms of that, actually information sharing is very important. So for MPA, what we've done is we've actually created what we call a Port Authority Cybersecurity CIO network, or PACnet for short. And it comprises more than 10 different port authorities with their CIOs within the network. And what we've established is a standard operating procedure to be able to share information on a real-time basis. And what this allows us is actually, when you have this particular network, you can actually receive information from different ports on potential attacks. And this allows everyone within the network to be able to then increase or heighten your surveillance because these attacks do tend to spread. And this gives you time to be able to then adjust your plans to mitigate should this attacks then occur within your domain or within your region. So I would say that these three are very important areas. And then MPA works with the different organizations to strengthen their different levels of cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thanks, David. So you're saying, when it comes to boosting port cybersecurity, three key points there: auditing the system, building resilience, and time as a factor in information sharing on a real-time basis. Thank you, David. I want to quickly come back to you, Robert, still on the topic of maritime security. Is this something that IAX is also concerned with?
Yes, Yvonne, very much. And, one of the key themes in my presentation was that digitalisation is going to become an increasing part of the shipping of the future. And IAX realised this, obviously many years ago, and we also realised that for this to be successful, it has to be secure. So cyber safety, cyber security is absolutely key to what IAX does, and you can see that because we have a dedicated cyber safety panel which really sends a message that we consider cyber safety to be a key challenge for the industry for the foreseeable future. In the same way that we have panels around safety, environment, hull, survey, etc., we also have one dedicated purely to cyber safety. And that panel has been doing a lot of work over the last few years with the objective of developing recommendations and ultimately unified requirements to deliver ships that are cyber resilient and which can maintain that cyber resilience throughout that working life. And we've been working on this, as I say, for a few years, and we've delivered initially 12 recommendations to help with that process. Just last year, we condensed those 12 recommendations into a single recommendation that the industry can use. And we've been very careful as we've gone through this process to make sure that the work that IAX is doing around cyber safety dovetails very closely with the work that some of these ship owner associations are doing, notably BIMCO and the ICS, around operational cybersecurity, because these are two sides of the same coin. One is how do you design cyber safety into a ship, and then the other is how do you operate those ships in a cyber safe manner. Our emphasis, of course, as IAX is very much on the design elements, and so that's where we've been working. But given this need for close dovetailing between the two elements, we've also been running a very large joint industry working group to try and bring all sides of the industry together on this key point, because cyber safety, cyber security is something that affects all of us. And I make the difference here between cyber safety and cyber security, because cybersecurity tends to focus on external threats. And of course, that is very important and they need to be guarded against. But increasingly, as we see increasingly sophisticated vessels with a multitude of different digital systems on board, we also need to be absolutely clear that those individual digital systems are working in harmony in one another, and that we are not inadvertently introducing risk into the ship's envelope through the interoperation between the various cyber systems on board. And that's why we see cyber safety as being equally important as cyber security. And so we continue to work along those lines. We're hoping to take this single recommendation, which is the consolidation of the 12 previous recommendations, and turn that into a unified requirement within the next sort of 12 to 18 months. And the reason that we're taking this pause is, again, because we believe it very important to work closely with the industry here. And so what we're doing is we've deployed now this single recommendation. We're busy with receiving excellent feedback through the joint industry working group that we are running. And then as we have that industry feedback, so we can use that to tailor it to make sure that when the unified requirement is launched, it really is effective in delivering cyber resilient ships, and that those ships are capable of maintaining that cyber resilience throughout their working life.
Thank you, Robert. You've definitely highlighted the importance of cyber safety and cyber security in the maritime industry, and also looking forward to cyber resilient ships going forward. I want to pose this question on cybersecurity to Hadiza and Darwin as well, because earlier on we talked a bit about the challenges that both your respective regions were facing. But this issue of cybersecurity, what is Nigeria doing on that front? Hadiza.
Cybersecurity is quite an important thing, and it has attendant challenge across various sectors. Nigeria is putting in place the mechanism required to prevent such access. Our agency tasked with compliance on cybersecurity has developed the necessary deployment that is needed. And particularly on the maritime sector, we have our layers of cybersecurity that has been deployed across the digitization processes that we have commenced. More so for the existing ones, we recognize the attendant consideration and issue that would arise from any failure in access to our cyber deployments, and these necessary parameters have been put in place. And as I said, a lot of our digitization projects are actually work in progress now. So this recognized cybersecurity component are being deployed as it is now while it's being built, and also recognizing it as an attendant challenge across the board for all such digitization processes.
Thank you, Hadiza. Darwin, can I get you to weigh in on this question on cybersecurity in the maritime sector too?
Yes, and certainly in our space, we are emerging into the digital platform. So from a cybersecurity perspective, obviously, we are beginning to look at how we can harden our resilience, well, develop and harden our resilience from that perspective. However, as small island development states, we are literally, in most cases, vulnerable because of the lack of capacity, lack of both from the technological and human capacity standpoint. So to some extent, we are heavily reliant on our sporting partners, and we'll be working closely with them. We do a lot of work. We're doing a lot of work from that perspective with the Organization of American States, OAS, the IMO, and other agencies that are working towards spearheading some of the discussion and training. But and that too is something that the region, and I like to broaden it, because the implementation of the digital space is not just something that we are doing. There's some countries in our region that are moving towards the port community systems. And as they move in those directions, that too the whole concept of cybersecurity becomes very, very critical. And so in our case, it is something that we are building and looking for some support from our larger, more experienced partners. And we'll be working closely to ensure that as we roll out more and more of our digital landscape, that is maintained as a hot priority. So that is indeed a challenge, one that we have had some challenges with. A few years ago, we had someone who got into a port and literally shut us down for 2 days. And as the only port in an entire country, it is crucial that we are not able to face these sort of challenges. So in some cases, there are business disruption. In our case, you can have an actual entire country held at ransom because we have a single port. And so the urgency to ensure that there is stronger and more vigilance there is important. And likewise, as vessels interface with us, it is crucial for that relationship between our more experienced partners to sort of play a center stage in assisting us, because sometimes the access point may not necessarily be where we think it's coming from. So strengthening the smaller, more vulnerable areas is something that we all ought to look at. And as Robert mentioned, broadening that perspective is, I think, a key element. So the support is needed, and we are open to extending ourselves to getting the support required to put us in a better position.
Thank you so much, Darwin. Well, there you have it. There is a call for collaboration from Darwin Tillemack to other maritime partners who are tuning in today. I just did the call to action for you, Darwin. All right. I want to coming back to you, David, because we've got a question here that I think you might be best placed to answer to. How can governments and international bodies work together to maximize the benefits of digitalization, David?
Well, thank you for that question. I think it's not a question of conviction because everyone recognizes the importance. And I think it's a matter of being able to put in the right resources to the correct projects which matter. And to us, I think the most, I would say, useful sort of collaborations and getting governments and different industry bodies is to work on data exchange. And this is a common challenge that I think every digitalization sort of project faces. And this is something which I think will be useful if we don't keep reinventing the wheel. So if we can basically be able to then recognize that actually we should always try to use open or common standards and not reinvent the wheel by creating customized standards, that's one area which I think that we can actually move and advance digitalization. So, for example, for MPA, we are involved deeply with the work on the IMO Compendium, supporting the FEL committee, looking at the different data definitions and data models. And I think that's one particular project which definitely the different industry partners as well as government and I would say associations should be able to then come together, collaborate, and contribute to this effort. The other area is, of course, for MP is that in terms of digitalization, we think that the beauty of it is actually digitalization is scalable. What works in one port, and I think we've seen in the example of Darwin and Norway in terms of looking at single windows and helping different governments in terms of implementing single windows. I think that's something which is definitely scalable and which will have a meaningful outcome. So for Singapore, for example, recently we've put out a call for action. We've worked with the IMO to basically implement a single window for facilitation of trade project, or in short, SWIFT, and to invite the medium-sized ports to then benefit from the experience that we have building our maritime single window, which is digitalport.sg. So in short, if I could say, we should focus on the biggest challenges, which I think it's data exchange, and then use standards which are more open and common. Thank you.
Yeah, data exchange. I like that point, right? Don't reinvent the wheel. Make it scalable. It's not about duplicating efforts, but just making that efficient solution work for everybody else. I see my other panelists nodding, and I think this is a great question to open up to the rest of my panel too. So maybe, Hadiza, you're smiling too. Let me have your views on that. Do you know how governments...
Thank you, Yvonne. Yes.
International bodies can work together to better harness the benefits of digitalization?
No, absolutely, Yvonne. It's an excellent point that you raised about from what was mentioned regarding the need to recognize it as not one size fits all, and also the need for it to be scaled up, as David had mentioned. One of the things that I believe is key for countries is the recognizing the mandatory requirement for national governments to introduce the electronic information exchange between ships and ports, which came into force in April 2019 under the IMO FAL Convention. Governments are now required to collaborate with IMO and its member states in deploying the necessary electronic exchange information within their ports community. So such positions as stipulated by IMO would leverage with member states to enable them do the necessary deployment and ensure that they're able to partner and get the necessary technical support that is needed to enable them facilitate the deployment of such digital exchanges that are needed within the maritime sector. For us in the Nigerian ports, we recognize the attendant need for that and the collaboration we have extended with IMO for them to deploy the necessary technical support to us is an aspect which speaks to the need for international organizations and government agencies to collaborate to get the full benefit of such digitalization. And the learning curve from other member states is important. What has been done, again, we'll repeat, Antigua and Barbados is an example of what a success story you have where there's a partnership and technical support within IMO and those member states. So strengthen collaboration and recognizing the need to scale up. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that explanation, Hadiza. I did want to open that question to Robert and Darwin, but I'm mindful of time, and I have another very pressing question that I would like each of you to weigh in on too, and that is the role of humans in a digitalized, automated maritime sector. What can we do to better prepare our maritime workforce? Oftentimes when people say digitalization, they think displacement of jobs, but conversely, we're looking at opportunities as well. Darwin, your thoughts on that, please.
Well, certainly, there can be no digitalization without humans. That's a standard requirement. However, ensuring that the workforce matches the requirements and ensuring that the capacity is actually there requires, I think, a joint approach. From the management standpoint, we have to equip our people, give them opportunities to ensure that the right sort of strategic plan is in place, which should include the necessary training, development, and capacity building among them. I think the mistake is always may be made to launch into a digital direction without adding the supporting elements to ensure that the human resource development is being matched and the opportunities are there to ensure that comfort is given to our people to ensure that they know that we are trying to bring them along. The system only works if our people are prepared and engaged. And I think making that match is something that we ought to move towards. That being said, when it's done right, the combination of a prepared workforce with the digital platform will create a type of efficiencies that we've seen. Because in cases where you may have the converse taking place, humans can retard the impact and the efficiency of digitalization. So the harmony has to be in place, and that has to come from leadership, ensuring that the people are not excluded from the planning, from the development, from the training, and then the implementation becomes easier if these factors are properly aligned.
Well said, Darwin. Like you said, digitalization cannot happen without humans, and when there is harmony on that front, I think it makes for a great lethal combination. Robert, your thoughts on how we can further enhance our maritime workforce for a digitalized shipping future?
Yeah, I mean, I think Darwin made a number of excellent points, and we need to remember that, that the move to the digitalization of shipping is a journey. This isn't something that's going to happen overnight. And so what we'll see is a progressive degree of penetration of digital technologies onto the vessels. And this will happen over the next, 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. And what we need to do, and what is at the heart of everything that IAX does, is to make sure that we keep the human at the front and center of these increasingly sophisticated and digitally enhanced vessels. Because it's very important to remember that there will be people on board for the foreseeable future, and that they have to be able to operate these ships and to use the digital technologies, which are increasingly going to be at their disposal, in a way that complements their day-to-day activities and continues to allow them to man the ships and operate those ships in a manner which is safe and also in a manner that supports good environmental practices. So absolutely, the human element goes core with the development and deployment of these new digital technologies.
Thank you so much, Robert. Very quickly, Hadiza, your thoughts on this, and then I'll come to David, and then we'll wrap. Hadiza?
Yeah, I think it's important, as we've all mentioned, the issue around digitization across the maritime domain, recognizing the attendant need to preserve cybersecurity, and also noting the need for us to understand the linkage between the personnel deployed and also digitization as necessary. I'm keen to recognize that the partnership and between the international organizations and governments is important in recognizing the need to efficiently deploy these digital platforms for safe and secure maritime domain across the continent. We are challenged in a certain extent as it relates to digitization within the African continent, but we're leveraging on technical know-how and the learning curves that have been experienced by other countries so that we can scale up depending on the level of digital coverage we have across our regions and across the continent in totality. Thanks, Yvonne.
Thank you so much, Hadiza. And David, some last quick words from you, please, on what we can do to scale up our maritime workforce.
Well, I would say the fellow panelists made excellent points, and I just want to reiterate that the automated future is inevitable. And so the role of humans will evolve in terms of capabilities and skill sets, and there will be a focus or a shift in focus to more cognitive, more soft skills that workers bring to the workplace, right? And the key is really how humans and machines can complement each other and the value that people add to the workforce of the future. So while technology will help with the repetitive tasks, there are skills and sort of soft skills which they cannot replicate at this moment in this level of technology. For example, creativity, empathy, care, integrity, imagination. These are important values that will bridge technology and humanity. What's important is to recognize that digitalization and automation will transform the way we work, and we need to embrace it. And the shift is really to be able to then ensure that we have the next generation or the current generation to be able to adapt to it, and we have talent be able to then exploit this sort of technologies. So in Singapore, for example, we support a lot of schemes, programs, training courses, both public and private sectors, to help reskill and upskill the maritime workforce. And companies must be willing to invest in equipping their workers, and especially in areas where this is disrupted by technology. So I think it's important for all of us to take a long-term view, to be able to develop proper talent, and then to be able to then embrace and exploit technology for the good of the entire maritime sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Well said. I think, I have to agree with all my panelists today. Many excellent points raised. Never has the adoption of digitalization been more essential for this industry. My panelists have advocated for the wider adoption of digitalization to other maritime industries, where it's clear that digitalization can provide the tools and solutions that are needed to meet the challenges of international shipping. And given that the pace of digitalization is somewhat uneven and accelerated in other parts, regulators need to adapt and even rethink their approach. My panelists and I have also talked about ways in which we can foster inclusive collaboration in this industry, and that includes interoperability, capacity assistance, and information sharing, all elements that we need to fully benefit from the digitalization opportunities, which can then ultimately contribute to the decarbonization of the shipping industry. Thank you, David, Robert, Hadiza, and Darwin, for your insights today. Really enjoyed speaking with all of you. Thank you. Now, to round up the IMO Singapore Future of Shipping Conference, it's an honor to invite Mr. Selwyn Hart, the Special Advisor to the Secretary General on Climate Action and the Assistant Secretary General for the Climate Action Team, for the closing remarks. Mr. Hart, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and good morning, or good evening, good night, wherever you are. It's certainly a pleasure for me to join you. I wish I could be physically in Singapore. It's a country that I have enormous love and respect for, and it's a country that I visited a few years ago. And I really want to commend Singapore for its outstanding leadership in bringing so many talented and so diverse a group of colleagues together to address some of the challenges, but also opportunities available to shipping. And the convening of this conference is extremely timely. Most of you would have seen or heard about what happened yesterday on the first day of the Leaders Summit, which was convened on Earth Day by President Biden. And it is now clear, it is absolutely clear that decarbonization of the global economy is inevitable. Yesterday, we had all of the G7 countries, and the European Union and the UK have now made ambitious 2030 commitments and have all now committed to net zero emissions, carbon neutrality by 2050. And most of this has happened, and this builds on a lot of the momentum that has occurred over the course of the last 6 months or so, where we now see 2/3 of carbon emissions and well over 70% of the global economy committing to net zero by mid-century. Over 700 cities and 1/5 of large public corporations have also committed to net zero by 2050. And as we saw yesterday, that coalition continues to grow. And as we approach COP26 at the end of this year, it is quite clear that COP26 will send a strong signal on the inevitability of decarbonization of the global economy by mid-century. And decarbonization of the global economy has significant implications for the shipping sector. The maritime sector is really the backbone of the global economy, with over 80% of global trade by volume carried by sea and handled by ports. And coming from an island myself, Barbados, maritime transport is also a key pillar of global tourism and the blue economy. I know that global tourism has taken a massive hit as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, but we hope that it will rebound soon. So net zero by 2050, a decarbonization of the global economy, will leave no sector untouched. And this goes for the shipping sector. And it is against this backdrop that an event like this, the next gen inaugural meeting, which closely links issues of digitization and decarbonization, represents an important, really important forum for maritime states and industry players really to put together plans and strategies for achieving this decarbonization objective. I listened in carefully to the last panel, which spoke about the enormous benefits of digitization and many of the opportunities that it will afford countries and the sector in general. I say the same about decarbonization, and I believe that digitization and decarbonization will definitely go hand in hand. There is significant potential from zero emission fuels using the abundant renewable energy sources. Of course, a significant amount of investments will need to be made in the area of new fuels, as well as port infrastructure. And this will require significant spending over the course of the next few years or so. But I am also happy to hear that the special emphasis is being paid to the least developed countries and small island developing states and countries in Africa, who will definitely need to be provided with the necessary support and investment in order to enable them to be part of this decarbonization wave. So my central message to you, certainly in the context of the International Maritime Organization and its work to reduce the carbon footprint of the industry and the sector, is that while you've made really great progress starting in 2018, when you set a set of ambitious emissions reduction targets, you will need to revisit those targets, because net zero by 2050 will have significant implications on how the shipping business operates in the foreseeable future. So, as I said at the opening, no industry and no sector will be untouched. We need initiatives like this Next Gen initiative, which is launched by Singapore, really to help those countries like the SIDS, like the LDCs, like countries in Africa, to be able to be part of this global wave. Certainly, we look forward to continuing to work with all of you. The Secretary General has identified the shipping and aviation industries as industries of particular interest. We know that this is an industry that is considered, or a sector that is considered hard to abate, but with cooperation, with multilateral support, with the necessary investment and focus, we believe that it can definitely be a leader in the growing coalition committing to decarbonization. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hart. Indeed, it's about re-examining and also resetting some of those targets that have already been set. And this brings us to the end of the IMO Singapore Future of Shipping Conference. A big thank you to our panelists and speakers for sharing your wonderful insights today. And of course, we'd like to thank you, our audience, for joining us today. Now, before we close, we want to hear from you, so please scan the QR code with your mobile devices or head over to the link on your screen right now to complete a very short post-event survey. And on behalf of IMO and Singapore, thank you all again for being here with us today. I do hope you enjoy the rest of Singapore Maritime Week 2021. Goodbye.